It's your boy Luke here for another course breakdown, this time for the Honda Classic, which, to be honest with you, I am super excited about. It's one of my hometown events just up the road from me, so I'll be there for all 4 days. Also, a little bit early for the practice round on Wednesday to give you guys some reports from the grounds. So you guys are going to have a really good idea of how this golf course will be playing. There'll be some extra content out here on the channel as well. So that's why this is coming out on Sunday rather than the Monday. So getting out here, getting this out early because we have a lot to get out this week. And of course, here in this video, we're going to go over what we already know about the golf course. In terms of the wind, we'll know that later in the week. In terms of green speeds, all of the sort of specifics that you would hope to get from the golf course, we'll go over there on Wednesday. But for today, we're going to talk about how this golf course plays year in and year out, mostly from a statistical perspective, talking about some of my key stats for analysis this week. Of course, some of the comparison courses that I'm using from around the PGA Tour for some of that corollary analysis, and just who's won here over the years and what are the skill sets that should translate really well. The idea is whether you're a seasoned sports bettor, somebody that's playing DFS golf, or just a fan of the sport in general, you're going to have a really good idea of how this course is playing and what to expect for this weekend. So with that being said, let's go ahead and hop right on into it. First off, with a review of this week's field. All right, hopping into the field, we don't have the strongest field, especially if we compare it to what we've seen over these last 2 to 3 weeks, but we still have an absolute star in the venue itself. In terms of some of the highlights, we do have players like Daniel Berger, Brooks Koepka, both hometown kids going to be teeing it up. Louis Oosthuizen, the number 13 player in the world, will be here. Joaquin Niemann, who is leading right now. Of course, we don't know whether he's going to actually end up winning this golf tournament. We'll have to see by the end of the day. If you're watching this, you probably already know who won, but there's Sungjae Im, Keith Mitchell, Ricky Fowler, you have Tommy Fleetwood, Ian Poulter, and even Shane Lowry teeing it up. So even though we don't have a lot of the guys in the top 10, we still get our fair share amount of guys that are solid in that top 50 in the official World Golf Rankings, and I expect one of those elite tier players to win. Over the years, we have seen some surprises. I mean, Matt Jones last year, at rated around 150 to 1, was a relatively big surprise, but we've also seen our fair share amount of winners that are just top-end players to begin with. I mean, let's go through the last winners of this event. It's Sungjae Im at 6 under par. We had Keith Mitchell at 9 under par, Justin Thomas at 8, Ricky at 12, Patrick Harrington, and that was more when he was in his prime rate, at 6 under par, and Russell Henley way back in the day at 8 under par. In general, all of those players are more established names, people that didn't just hop up out of nowhere, and even Matt Jones, who won last year at 12 under par, which is 5 strokes clear of everyone else in the field. We knew about the guy. This isn't somebody that just popped up out of nowhere. So to win at this event, you have to be a more established veteran, somebody that doesn't have holes in their game. And a lot of the guys that are newer on tour, they usually have at least one weakness. So that's usually why you don't see them compete here. And outside a few notable exceptions, that's been the case over the years. This is a regular field event. We have 144 players plus exemptions, so we'll have to get the exact number by the end of the week. So, again, we went through some of the headliners there. The cut line will be the top 65 in ties, so regular cut line rolls there. And last year it was +1, but it's typically between 1 and maybe 4 over par, sometimes even 5, 6 over par we've seen. The golf course can really be that difficult. In terms of a scoring average, last year it was 71.9. That is 1.9 shots over par. Again, we'll hop into the reasons for that here in a second, but a lot of that comes down to the weather. When the weather kicks down, you might see a scoring average closer to par, or maybe just a little bit over par. But anytime there's more than 15 to 20 mile an hour winds at this golf course, and if you're from Florida, you've been down here, you've played these type of golf courses, you know that's a regularity. You're going to see 2, maybe even 3 shots over par as the scoring average. It's an extremely difficult golf course with a ton of hazards, a lot of undulation, and a lot of strategy that is involved in almost every single shot. Which is why I say that it's the star of the show this week, right? We have guys like Brooks and Berger out here, but really what everybody is out there to see is this golf course. So with that being said, let's go ahead and hop right into what makes this place so special. All right, we're at PGA National, the champion course in Palm Beach Gardens, Florida. It's been the home to PGA championships in the past, a Ryder Cup, U.S. Amateurs, also another major championship level venue that we've been blessed with over the last month. Of course, we had the Genesis over there at Riviera, Pebble Beach, we had Torrey Pines. I mean, just a ton of iconic golf courses. This fits that same type of mold. Sure, it's not the same type of venue. We're on the opposite end of the country, but it brings its own unique set of challenges to the table. It is the hardest golf course on the PGA Tour. If we take a look at the last 5 years, it is the hardest scoring average of any course outside of majors. If you take a look at the US Open specifically, of course, it changes venues from year to year. It is harder, but in terms of a regular PGA Tour stop, this is as difficult as you're going to see. Last year, the scoring average, like I said, was 71.9, which was 1.9 shots over par per round. The cut was only 1 over par. That's because on Thursday, it was relatively easy conditions. But of course, Friday through Sunday, we saw what we were used to seeing over there, which is hazards, winds, and undulation. Oh my. I mean, there's the bear trap, which is the 3-hole stretch on the back nine, 15 through 17, which is the hardest stretch of golf that you'll find on the PGA Tour. Guys are going to be hitting shots out of water seemingly in almost every single hole, whether it's off the tee, into greens. If you're not precise with your golf shots here, you're penalized on every single shot. There's not really exception to that rule, because even when you're hitting it into the rough or a fairway bunker or something like that, it's setting up an atrocious angle. I mean, it's Tom Fazio design, which we'll get to here in a second. He loves playing with these players' heads, particularly when he's tasked with making a difficult golf course. And that was exactly his motive here with PGA National here at the championship course. It is a par 70, your typical par 70 setup, only 2 par 5s on the docket. 15 through 17, we already talked about, is the bear trap. That is an extremely difficult stretch. You have guys that are going to shoot 5 over par there for the week, some that even shoot close to 7, 8 over par there over the 4 rounds. And you might have maybe 1 or 2 players that shoot under par there for the week. And those are very often the guys that end up winning this golf tournament. It is a 7,125 yard golf course, but it plays a lot longer than that. First off, there's a lot of dog legs, a lot of forced laybacks where you're not able to get it the full way out there, 320, 330 yards. You have to take something like an iron off of the tee. And the wind also impacts play as well. I mean, you're dealing with 15 to 20 mile an hour winds almost every single day. That's just reality down here in South Florida. You got to learn how to play in the wind if you're going to play golf down here. But also when it kicks up, you could see upwards of 30 to 35 mile an hour gust, which is pretty insane. You pretty much can't wear a hat out there at times. That's how bad the wind can get. And it's a factor every single year, without exception. I mean, the lowest score that we've seen here was 12 under par, what we had for Matt Jones last year, and it was still a major factor in play. And then 4 years ago, again, there was another guy that got the 12 under par. That's really the ceiling score that you're going to get at this golf course. More often than not, you're going to be in that single digits. So as we go through the week, the weather will become more and more apparent to us. We'll get a more accurate wind report. So we'll wait for a lot of the discussion on that, right, until we get a more accurate wind report. The greens are Bermuda grass greens. They are relatively large. I'd say slightly larger than tour average, right there at 7,000 square foot on average per green. The Bermuda grass greens, they're extremely grainy Bermuda, though. Of course, being in South Florida, you're going to be dealing with the grainiest greens in the world. It's just what you get down here in South Florida. I essentially am just completely used to it at this point because you play down here. You can read the greens almost based on the green itself. Of course, you got to take a little bit of a survey of the lay of the land, but when you have greens as grainy as you get down in Florida, the grain overpowers the break most of the time. You have to play the grain more than the break, and that's what you get down here in South Florida. So the guys that are familiar on these surfaces, that are used to that type of effect, are going to have a lot of success this week. The fairways are also Bermuda grass, same thing with the rough. The fairways also have a lot more undulation than you'd expect in South Florida. They added a lot of undulation. What they did is they dug out a lot of the fairways and they added in hollows and whatnot. And they took all of that extra dirt and they put it in between the holes. So not only does it kind of isolate you from the other holes, of course, they don't really like that you can see other players when you're playing golf there. They kind of want you to feel like you're in your own area, more of like the private type of experience. But it also adds a lot of difficulty because a lot of times there's a hazard on one side. I think every single hole here has a water hazard or something nuts like that. Every single one. And on one side of the hole is going to be that water hazard, and on the other side is going to be that massive hill that they had to build to build out and add all these undulations in the fairways. And if you hit the ball on that hill, I mean, it's better than being in the water hazard. You're going to have a side hill lie at like 45 degrees. And a lot of times people shank that shot into the water. So it's you can't miss anywhere. That's what I really say about this golf course. It's really what makes it so difficult is you got to pick your poison, right? Challenge the penalty area down the left or bail out and end up in a pretty horrible spot in the rough. The rough isn't gnarly, it's not anything long. It's usually between 2.5, 3 inches to start the week, right around 3.5, 4 inches to end the week. They do cut it usually after Friday, but it's Bermuda grass. It tends to be a little bit gnarly in nature, even if it's only 2 to 3 inches, just because it grabs a little bit more than those other grass types. So you haven't seen that much of a penalty over the rough, especially here for the Genesis Invitational. Kikuya, when it's cut to just 1 or 2 inches, isn't all that bad. But of course, if that were Bermuda grass, you would be seeing a lot more of a penalty. So don't get used to that. Accuracy off the tee is starting to be important once again. What we're going to do now is, now that we've gone through some of the specifics, I want to go through a hole-by-hole analysis. This is a course that, again, I've had the pleasure of playing. I have a lot of familiarity with it, gone to multiple golf tournaments here. So let's go ahead and talk about some of the strategy in play and exactly the type of players that could take advantage of some of these specific holes. Alright guys, on the screen you can see the Pro Visualizer tool, and this is how we're going to go hole by hole for this course. Hole number 1 is about as easy as a hole as you're going to get here at PGA National because it has about as much room off the tee as you're going to get. So let's go ahead and show you where we're going to be putting the tee shot. Ideally, if you can get it up into this bottleneck, you can see that this would be an aggressive tee shot out there at 260. You can leave yourself a wedge. Unfortunately, because of this bunkering on the right, some of these trees on the left, most players are going to opt to lay back, just hit an iron off the tee, right? Don't put yourself in trouble off the first tee of a really difficult golf course. Doing so leaves you closer to a middle or even, I'd say a middle iron for most of these players. Really, the trouble here on hole 1 is still in play. Over here on the right, this is a very dense forest. If you end up hitting into it, it's at the best a pitch out. And of course, on the left, you do have a little bit of room here, a water hazard. This is the most room that you're going to get here at PGA National. Typically, the hazards are much closer to the fairway. So that's why they go ahead and give you a little bit of a handshake. Again, either a middle iron or a wedge into the first green, which is protected by a fairly large greenside bunker. But it's something that you should be able to take advantage of as long as you hit that first easy iron off the tee into the fairway. Next up, hole number 2 is a little bit more tricky. You can see it's much longer there at 463 yards. Getting out there with your tee shot, there is a fairway bunker in play. And into the green, it's also not an easy shot because even the longest hitters are still going to have a middle iron. It's to an elevated green that's protected by not only one natural area, but also a chipping area over the green that is not friendly at all. So go ahead and show you what I'm talking about. Of course, the penalty area, short left of the green, a bunker that'll also swallow up plenty of golf shots. But this area over here is not too friendly, obviously. It's really hard to even get that on the green. But this chipping area over here to the right, with a green that slopes in this direction, is no-go as well. You'll see tons of people bogey this hole number 2 in that's where the hole really asserts itself and reminds you how difficult that it really is. Here for number 3, you do get your first of 2 par 5s, which is pretty nice there at 541 yards. It is gettable in 2 shots for people that can put their tee shot in the fairway, but as you'll see with all this bunkering back here, that's not an easy feat. You do have a bunker back here that they will extend this hole from time to time, push those tee boxes back even further, which brings these bunkers into play even more so. The longest hitters on tour should still be able to get it out here. And that leaves you right around 250 yards into a relatively large green. You can see it's really long. It is kind of has that T shape there, that clover shape. And of course, they're not going to have the tee in the middle, the pin in the middle of the screen. It's going to be likely back in one of these shelves. So it's not really an eagle hole, but as long as you're hitting 2 solid ball striking shots off the tee into this green, you are looking at a birdie. It's one of the few holes, but you're really counting on making a 4. Next up, we do have a short par 4, but don't be fooled by that. This is still one of the harder holes on the golf course. First off, the bunkers out there definitely in play. Even if you lay back with a 3-wood, you have one in front of the fairway, the landing area. You're really like taking it over the corner of it to land it out here. Or of course, if you end up going through the fairway, because these fairways are tilted from left to right, you end up in this other side over here and potentially in that pot bunker. The green here is one of the more undulated greens on the entire green. So even though you don't really have hazards in play on this one hole, I mean, you have a few sporadic ones out here that can gobble up shots from time to time. It's not an easy hole. All the par 3s here are iconic, is really the word that I'd use for them. They're all pretty much have water in play, I believe, except for one of them. Usually they have forced carries in play, exactly like what you see here at the 5th hole, and you're just hoping to get a par at this point. I mean, you're going to play it to the middle of these greens, play it extremely conservatively. If you end up holding a 20, 30-foot putt, so be it. But at PGA National, farthest thing from your mind on these par threes is birdie. You're really just looking to survive these holes. Next up, you have a 490-yard par 5. So you get another par 5 here on the front 9, which is nice. It's 490 yards. I believe this is a hole that they play as a par 4 in regulation. So even though it says it's a par 5, this is going to play as a par 4 for the pros. It's relatively long. It has a hazard the whole way down the left side of this, which is devilish. It's going to grab a ton of balls. Last year, you saw a lot of people actually standing in the water hazards, having to chip shots back onto the fairway. Because if you don't carry it over the fairway, like let's say you start it, just completely pull hook it into this stuff over here in the left, you're not going to get that distance, right? Unless you hit it where the ball ends up. If it ends up just trickling in or something like that. It's not fun. It's one of the more difficult holes out here. Over here on the right, this is what I mean by the hill. You can't really see it here on the satellite imagery, but this is a massive little hill, especially for Florida, right? Florida is extremely flat, except for where it's man-made like it is right here. The fairway right here is also severely undulated from right to left. So even as a par 5, it would be difficult for these tour pros, particularly to make a 4. This is, I believe, the most difficult hole on the golf course because it is a converted to a par 4. Next up, we have hole number 7, which is also another difficult par 3. It's relatively long. It's got bunkering on it. It is a relatively large green, but it has a severe amount of undulation. So not quite the carry. It doesn't have the hazard in play as a lot of the other par 3s at this golf course do, but it's still difficult with that length. Next up, we have one of the more gettable par 4s. It's just straight out ahead of you. Again, at this part of the golf course, you don't really have hazards in play. It's more just for cosmetic reasons. This up here is more of a cosmetic hazard. No one's going to be trying to drive this green. It would take a 340, 350-yard drive to do so. So not something that players are looking to do. You just hit it out here with an iron. You hit into this green. The hazards don't really come into play. And you look to get a birdie at that hole. It's actually one of the easiest holes on the golf course, if not the easiest every single year. And right after you get easy holes here, they love to slap you with a hard hole right after. This is a brute of a par 4. The drive here, the water isn't really as much in play as you would expect. What's more in play is the hill over there on the right. So players are going to bang a driver. They're going to try and hit a draw right around this corner. There's a ton of palm trees back there to the left that you can see over here. It's actually a pretty dense forest. Unfortunately, though, people are going to end up in this bunker a whole lot, or way over here, which, again, this is one of those massive hills that they have in between the holes here, which makes any shots into this green nearly impossible. This is an elevated surface. Any shot from over here is like 5 to 10 yards below the green, almost impossible to get up and down. These bunkers, same type of thing. It's a difficult hole. They could have used this as 18, and it would have made sense. All right, let's go to the back 9. So the back 9, you do get a par 5. I believe they played this one as a par 4. This is another one of the converted par 4s because for the membership here, it is a par 72. I'll let you know at the next par 5. I'll know for sure. I believe this is the par 4, though. It's difficult. They play it from a little bit closer than what they do for the membership here. They'll be playing from one of these tees up here to make it a little bit more reachable. It's difficult. Yeah, the more I think about this, I'm almost positive that this is the par 4. You're going to have right around 180, 190-yard shot into the green. It's one of the higher handicap holes. The chipping area over the green is very steep, as most of them are at this golf course. The bunker is also relatively penal. It's not something that you're really looking to birdie. It's more get out of there with par. Hole number 11 is another difficult hole. This hazard on here in the left does come into play. If you hit anything over here, it is sloped in that direction. It could actually go over the cart path and into the water. Saw that happen a few times. A few shots almost hit me, actually. Then over here on the right, if you're a really long hitter and you really juice a drive or it's downwind or something like that, this penalty area on the right is more than in play. And of course, the second shot over a water hazard to an island type of green, more of like a peninsula because it chokes off at that point. But just ridiculously difficult hole here. This is also in the top 3 most difficult holes on this golf course on most years. Next up, you have a par 4. This par 4, and I can just confirm, yeah, the last par 5, it's 18. I know it's the par 5. So that number 1 was a converted par 4. I can tell you for a fact. This right here, number 12, though, is another difficult par 4. It doesn't have quite as much hazard in play. Oh, we skipped hole there. But it does have that elevated hill on the left where, again, they dug out all of these fairways to add in those hollows. So it is an elevated surface. So if you hit it through the fairway, that's an issue. And this green, it is large, but it's extremely undulated. So if you're going to get large greens here, Fazio, his defense was to make them extremely hard to putt, extremely hard to hit the right tier of it. So not an easy hole by any means. And you're going to see there's 3 holes here that I would qualify as birdie holes. Outside of that, it's just try and survive. This is a 389-yard hole. I don't want to say gettable because the off the tee is almost impossible. If you try and lay up, you bring the water into play. As you can see, the water would be over here on the right. If you hit driver and try to take the water out of play, you bring this wooded area over to the right in play, which is a chip out at the very best, and of course this fairway bunker. So overall, it's not something that I'm looking to do. The green, of course, is difficult as any here at PGA National. Well, number 4 is relatively long par 4. The off the tee is very similar to the last hole where it chokes the longer that you go into the hole. So as you'll see, the fairway just gets smaller and smaller. You have all these fairway bunkers over there on the left. Any type of a severe mishit to the right is in the water. And this second shot, the further left you are, the safer the shot is, but the further right you are, you can see the more that the water would come into play. And of course, when they use this far right pin location, no matter where you are in the fairway, the water is going to be at least in these players' minds. You have another hard par 3 over the water. There's a huge amount of stands over here. I usually post up over here, so if anyone's going to the Honda Classic, you probably find me over here at some point because it's just a great viewing area. Of course, you can see the par 4 over there, that undulated green, and this really, really cool, fun to watch par 3. It's relatively long. They carry over the water. Everything undulates from left to right. So if you miss too far right, you're definitely going to end up in the water. And yeah, it's another hole that you're just hoping to make a par on, particularly if it gets really windy. You'll see a ton of shots put in the water there. And that's the start of the bear trap, right? So that's the first hole that they consider the hardest stretch on the PGA Tour. And here's the second one. It's an extremely difficult par 4. It's a forced layup, so it's one of those holes where I said you pretty much have to lay up to keep the water out of play. So you're laying up here with a 3-wood, maybe even a hybrid, and then you have a long shot over water. And because this is so exposed to the wind, there's just nothing to protect it right here. This is by far the most exposed part of the golf course. This shot is super devilish. People hit this in the water all the time, even though it's not a super long carry. Of course, the green is severely protected. You have the bunkering on each side. One of the hardest greens on the golf course as well. And lastly, 17, the last forced carry par 3 that you're just, again, hoping and praying to get out of here alive because it's at this exposed part of the golf course. It has the lake in front of it, a fairway bunker over the green, which is like almost isn't even fair at this point. This is another hole that people hit a ton of shots into the water. Also, huge stands that go up here, so it's also really fun to watch. And you can also hit the water over the green. A lot of times they put the pin right over here on the right, particularly on Sunday, or way over here on the left as well. Brings the water into play in both aspects. And now that you've gone through the bear trap, if you somehow survived, got over that through 1 over par, that might actually be beating the field. A lot of times the average is 1.5, 2 over par. You get the par 5. You get the par 5 18th, which is another hole that's fun to watch, but it is gettable for the longest hitters in 2. You can see if you can get out there right around 290 yards. You're going to have 270 yards into the green, but it's going to have a forced carry over water. So any mishit is going to severely penalize you, leave you looking at par at best. Most people will choose to lay up. So you'll see over here, this layup zone sets up a perfect angle into the green. And that is what you're going to see most of these players do, just from experience. A hospitality tent over there, I had a ticket into for most of the days. Through my mom's actual company, I was actually able to go up there. And yeah, most guys were laying up here, hitting into it. It wasn't that exciting for that reason, right? But when guys went for it, most of them hit it in the water. So it was the smart decision, even though it wasn't the fun decision for everybody that was watching. Yeah, the scoreable thing to do is to go over here to the left. That 270-yard over the shot water, most people, if they're going to do it, are just going to bail out left anyways and end up in one of these pot bunkers, which is no guarantee to get up and down. In fact, most people weren't getting up and down from over there. Yeah, just laying up was definitely the move there. And as you guys can see from just a generalistic standpoint, this course has, first off, a lot of water in play every single hole, but also a lot of strategy involved. All right, now that we've gone through the hole-by-hole analysis, let's talk about some of my key metrics for this week. First off, going to be shots gained approach, and this is definitely an approach-first golf course, as most difficult tracks are. Not only you're going to need sharp iron play to put yourself in position and go out there and score, you also have all those hazards into greens. Again, a lot of those forced carries on those par 3s. A lot of the par 4s also have protection green side as well. And of course, to score, get to 12 under par like Matt Jones did, you're going to have to stick it close. These greens have a ton of undulation. They're really tricky, grainy Bermuda grass surfaces. So 10 to 20 footers do not come by very often. So approach play is really where you win this golf tournament. Getting up and down when you miss here as well, if you're getting into sand or even some of these hollowed out chipping areas that I mentioned around every single green, that's no guarantee as well. It's one of the hardest golf courses to get up and down on the PGA Tour, and that's why we see this place have so much teeth. That's why the scoring average here is so high. That's why it's over par every single year. Next up, it's going to be driving accuracy, which shouldn't be a surprise. As many hazards as there are into greens there's even more off the tee. Almost every single off the tee shot at least has a water hazard or a tree-lined fairway in play. This is a golf course that, again, also has those mounds in between every single golf hole, which can be almost as penalizing as some of these water hazards, frankly, from time to time. Keeping the ball in play and putting yourself in position to attack pins is almost as important as being able to do so to begin with. There's forced carries in play. There's a lot of angles that need to be set up for these par fours. So being able to put yourself in play is just as, again, one of the more important things this week. Next up, we have shots gained putting on Bermuda grass, which after the first two key stats, I'll admit there's a huge gap, and then there's shots gained putting. And we're looking specifically on Bermuda grass because these surfaces are so grainy. When you have those 10 to 20 foot putts for birdie, when you have those 7 to 10 foot par putts, you got to make a ton of them. Of course, if you want to go out and win this golf tournament, what's going to separate all of the good ball strikers is the putting. That's why Matt Jones ended up winning by 5 strokes. There were a few other players like an Aaron Wise, a few of the other people that finished in the top 10 that had excellent ball striking numbers. They just didn't gain nearly as many strokes on the greens. So if you're looking for top end upside, people to perhaps put outright bet-ons, make sure that they're good on Bermuda grass, particularly over the last, let's say, 20 to 30 measured rounds. So that's something that I'll definitely be taking a look at because, again, you're going to have plenty of long birdie and putts for par as well. Lastly, let's look at some of the extra key stats I'm looking at. First off, shots gained around the green. Because there is a ton of wind in play here from time to time, making sure that you can get up and down when you're out of position will be important. And of course, because of the difficulty of doing so at this venue. Also, bogey avoidance I'm taking a look at. Shots gained in windy conditions is something that I'll be weighing in my pool a little bit more than normal. And of course, sand saves, with so many of those fairway and greenside bunkers in play on almost every single hole. And now lastly, for our comp courses for PGA National, the champion course, we have Bay Hill at number 1, Bay Hill Club and Lodge, which is by far the best comp that we can use here. You get a very similar amount of water in play, similar amount of difficulty in terms of the undulation on the greens, some of the tee shots, of course, some of the strategy in play as well. It's also one of the more difficult golf courses on tour. If you don't have PGA National as the number 1 in terms of scoring average, most of the time it's because Bay Hill ended up stealing it. It also has quite a bit of emphasis on the weather because it is extremely exposed to the wind, much like what we have here at the National. You're set up to get destroyed by wind from time to time. So I really like everything but the setup. One's a par 70, one's a par 72. But in terms of looks off the tee, the eye test, it checks everything we're looking for. Next up, we have TPC Sawgrass, which is definitely a lot more scoreable than PGA National. It's also a different setup. It has much more protection from the wind, which gives you, because of all the trees in play on every single hole. But players are going to have to rely on the precision. That's what I like about the comp here. You have a ton of water in play off the tee. You have a ton of hazards in play around these greens, a ton of chipping areas, reliance on putting on Bermuda grass, all that sort of stuff. So from a skill set perspective, I really like TPC Sawgrass as a comp, but from the visual perspective, of course, it looks very different. So that's why it comes in at number 2. Bay Hill really checks all of those boxes, while TPC Sawgrass is checking most of them. And then there's another huge drop-off. So much like the top 2 key stats were much more important than everything else, Memorial Park is a much less, let's say, accurate comp than the other 2 on this list. I mean, those 2 are really the only ones I could think of, particularly that are on the PGA schedule every single year. Memorial Park is more of just a difficult venue, right? Scoring average is going to be 1.5, 2 shots over par. It's going to be hard to get up and down, undulated greens, a lot of hazards in play off the tee. Of course, that's over there in Texas. That's why it looks so much different. Even more so different than something like a TPC Sawgrass versus a PGA National. But I do like some of the skill set advantages that you'll see from golf course to golf course. Of course, guys that are good with the approach play, people that can avoid some of those bogeys and, of course, can get up and down. So it is something that I'm using for some of my metrics at the very least. That is all I've got for this week's course breakdown. Before you go on and get out of here, go ahead and let me know down in the comments what you think the winning score is going to be. I'm personally going to take 9 under par. I think it's going to be a little bit more difficult. We see some of that wind come into play, but go ahead and let me know what you've got for the winning score down below. As always, we're going to have a full week of golf content to come, whether it's for DFS, more course breakdowns, prize picks content. We're going to have you guys completely covered. So if you guys haven't already liked the video or subscribed to the channel, make sure you guys go ahead and do so before you go out and get out of here as well. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of that content. And of course, to help us grow this channel. I mean, we're getting close to 1,000 subscribers every single day. I mean, the growth rate of this channel over the last month or so has just been ridiculous. So keep showing that support. Let's get to 1,000 as soon as humanly possible. And of course, later on in the week, you're not wanting to miss any of my live reports from the course. We're either going to do a live stream or a video on Wednesday covering all of the conditions live from the golf course. And of course, because I'll be there for all 4 rounds, you'll have even more updates throughout the week. So let's have ourselves a week. Hopefully everybody finishes strong here at the Genesis. I have quite a few lineups that could win some money this week, some prize pick stuff as well. So good luck to you guys. Hopefully you guys had a good week at the Genesis, and I cannot wait for the Honda Classic.